Hey guys, how's it going today? So what am I working on now? Well, I got this 95 or 96 GMC 1500 series. It's a V6, 5-speed, two-wheel drive, 4.3 liter. And customer's complaint was it dies while driving, but it starts right back up. Okay. We drove this thing to no end. Couldn't get it to happen. The customer actually refused to pick it up. He says, it happens because you just got to keep driving it. We drove this thing for a month. It finally happened to me. I was going down the road and I was actually going just past that church that I always turn around at. And sure enough, all of a sudden, it shuts off on me. And I look real quick and the instrument cluster was dead. Okay. All of a sudden, instrument cluster came back to life and the thing started itself back up because basically it was in gear. I didn't hit the clutch. It was, rolling. And it came back to life. It did it again. Came back to life. Did it again. Died. I'm on the side of the road. I had nothing. All of a sudden, it came back to life. Started up. I drove back to the shop. I'm like, huh. I got back to the shop. I'm fiddling with it. All of a sudden, it dies on me at the shop. And I realized, as soon as it died, of course, the cluster, everything went dead. And also, when it came back to life, all the lights came back on, as if you shut the ignition switch off. Okay. So I was playing with it. And I could have swore that just playing with the ignition switch made it happen. So I started thinking that I had a faulty ignition switch. So then this morning, I go to get in it. I turn the key, nothing. Kept messing with it, nothing. Is the battery dead? Maybe the ignition switch came back on. And, of course, sitting overnight, maybe it came back on and killed the battery. Okay, I had a car in front of it, turned the headlights on. I had nothing. Okay, must be dead battery. I went to go get a jumper pack, and something told me, wait a second. So I opened up the hood and I looked at the battery terminals. I actually, because it's side terminal, I grabbed the posts. I can't move them by hand. It's like, usually they'll be loose or whatever. I couldn't move them by hand. I'm like, okay, gotta be a dead battery. Before I hooked up the booster, I said, let me try it one more time. I turned the key on. And all of a sudden the key comes on. I turn the headlights back on. Now I got headlights. Starts right up. Okay, now I can't make it happen again. I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I go ahead and I take apart the bottom of the dash. I want to look at the ignition switch and stuff like that. I was like, the headlights are not fed through the ignition switch. At least I want to make sure they're not. I was pretty confident they weren't. So I actually unplugged the ignition switch, the electrical portion of it, and I started checking the headlight switch itself and stuff like that. No, they're completely separate units. There's nothing tied into one another. All right, so what's going on? So I come back. Let me just show you what I got. So this is a work truck, so it's a bit rough, but not a big deal. So I got things disconnected here. As you see, I got the harness undone from its connector underneath there. Hard to see, but anyway, you come back underneath the hood, and I go and I check the fuse panel. Here's the main feed. The main feed itself, it looks okay. No big deal. I don't really see anything rough. It looks okay. I don't think we're going to have an issue with that. But then I start thinking, okay, what could cause this issue? I got the lights weren't working and the ignition was shutting down. All right, since they don't share anything, it has to be either a ground or a power. Well, guess what? They don't share a ground either. So the main power comes in from that fuse box under the hood. So now, what feeds that fuse box? It's that one main wire. So the one main wire here runs over to the battery. If you look, I got it disconnected now. But at first, when I was looking at it, I just grabbed the battery terminals, by hand, and they were tight. They didn't move. And, you can't visibly see any corrosion. So I'm like, okay, these seem to be okay. Never, ever do that. Because just guessing like that, saying these are okay, that's the problem. Let me show you. So this is a stacked terminal here. Basically, this one goes up against the battery. It's got this little like spacer collar here. And then this one goes to the outside of it, and it tightens up with that bolt. But look, there's the inside. So I was getting an intermittent bad connection. Let me flip this over, see if I can get it go in there. Can you see that? Can I even get in there good enough for you to see that? I don't know if I can. It doesn't seem like I can. Yeah. But yeah, if you, yeah, see it? See how corroded that is? There's my entire problem. So basically, what I'm getting at here is never think something's perfect. I was getting ready to unbolt grounds and stuff like that and just clean them up because I've seen grounds do some weird stuff. I'm absolutely confident that's the problem. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to clean this up and I'm going to take it for another ride. Like I said, we drove this thing for nearly a month, back and forth. I've probably put 50 miles on this thing. Never had an issue, and all of a sudden yesterday we had issues. It got a little bit colder. It was a little bit damp. I don't know if that made a difference. We drove it in the rain and everything else. Never had an issue. So I'm going to clean this up right now, and then we're going to go from there. So let me get that clean, and then let me show you what we got. I wound up having to trim back the red protective sheath on there a little bit so I could actually fold the inner piece out to actually clean it because the buildup was so extreme. It actually became like epoxy on there. And I actually had to grind it out with a sandpaper roll just to get it off there. It was so thick. I could probably hit it with a hammer and broken it off. But let me show you what it looks like now. But yeah, I wound up using that. And like I said, I had to cut this just so I could fold this back. That cover, it's just a protective cover so something doesn't hit it. But this ends up against the battery. It's up against the terminal. And as you can see, I cleaned that too with a wire brush. But I tried wire brushing it and I couldn't get it clean. And like I said, the buildup was so thick, it was just incredible. So I used that sandpaper whizzy wheel and cleaned that thing up. I also, the spacer that goes in between, I put that on the wire wheel to clean that up. So now I'm going to assemble everything, put that all back together. And I'm confident that was my problem. So let me do that. Let me get this all back together and then let's go for a road test. There we go. It's all together. It's nice and tight. It was tight before. Like I would have, it looked just like this. You know what? I would have never guessed that that was a problem. But like I said, that's the one main feed that goes over there. And it never had a starting problem, but it had a problem with this. So the corrosion between that one wire and the battery versus the stud and the other wire that goes down to the starter. Obviously that stud, if you looked at it, it wasn't corroded, but the other end was. That explains why that was causing that issue. At least I'm 99% sure that it is. I'm confident that's going to be the problem. Any of you GM guys that have to say, oh, you shouldn't cut back the sheath or whatever, shut up. This is the worst possible battery design ever created, and GM went with it for, what, 40 years? Junk. What a stupid design. I love GM product. I love it. That was a stupid design. And then when they went to top terminal, they put the battery in such a spot where you couldn't get to the terminals anyway. Anyway, if it was so good, they'd still be using it. Anyway, so I got the interior back together. I'm going to take it on a road test. You're not going to go with me on a road test. But then when I get back, we're going to sum this whole thing up and I'll explain a few other things to you. All right, let's get going. Everything went well on the road test. I'm pretty confident that's going to be it. I mean, we'll probably drive it again for a little while. I'm going to tell them what I found. Now, in case you guys are wondering, in case I didn't explain it right, why would that cause the issue? Well, think about it. That's the main battery feed from the battery to the fuse box under the hood, which feeds everything on the inside, ignition switch, headlights, everything. You lose that power, the car shuts off because the ignition system, you know, actually on the motor, fuel pump, everything else, thinks you turn the key off. It doesn't know it any different. But it was connected to the battery. How come it would crank over? Well, it wouldn't crank over sometimes. But how come it would crank over and that wasn't an issue letting it crank over? You know what I mean? Like, how come it wasn't enough resistance, whatever? Well, if you think about it, you had the battery, and then sandwiched between the battery, you had that next post, which was the post that led to the junction block. Then you had that little block in between, and then you had the battery cable that went down to the starter. But you had a bolt that went through the whole thing. So now the bolt is making contact on the back side of that one wire that goes through and sandwiches to the inside one. So you have power coming through that bolt and to the back side of that one cable. That's really not how it's supposed to power it up, or it's not how it's designed to power it up, but it just happens to happen that way. It's supposed to sandwich everything together to create the contact. So that's why sometimes it would crank, I believe. I'm pretty confident in this. So I'm pretty sure, like I said, I'm 100% confident 99.999% confident that it's fixed. Nothing else makes any sense to me. Because what you want to do too is you want to check and make sure you want to check to see, because I knew I didn't have headlights, I knew I didn't have ignition, so what's shared? So I looked at wiring diagrams. I got power coming in and everything else, and there's no shared powers. Okay. Well, what about grounds? Do they have a shared ground? Because if they have a shared ground, that could be the problem. Nope, no shared grounds. And you have to look at the wiring diagrams and see, okay, here this one has G200 as a ground. That's what it's marked off as. And then you have G207 for the, on the ignition side. Well, that's two separate places. It's not shared. So if you had a shared power source or a shared ground source, that could be your problem. But the fact that I didn't have both, and they're both different, well, where else does it go? Well, the only place it's shared is that fuse box under the hood. So the fuse box under the hood shares everything out from there to everything else, or to everything on the interior, and it only has one power source. It has to be that one power source. So yeah, I kind of jumped ahead, and I really thought it was ignition switch. That's why I started checking it. I should have used my head. I really should have. Could have saved myself a little time. But whatever. Like I said, I'm not perfect. I just, I get things. I get through them. I know what to look for and stuff like that. But it's years of experience. Been doing this for 40 years. But even still, I make mistakes, and I wouldn't call that a mistake. I should have gone a different direction. I did eventually figure it out. So anyway, that's going to be it. If for some reason this thing should happen to come back with an issue, and I really doubt it's going to, I'll make another video. But I'm confident this is fixed. So I know I was rambling. Anyway. All right, guys, that's it for this video. If you're getting something out of my videos, hit that like button. If you could, please subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. See, I can't say it twice. I don't know why. Tell your friends to subscribe. Okay. Anyway, that's it. Have a great day. Keep wrenching.